Hey guys, welcome back. Today I'll be showing you how to install new fuel injectors in the T.P.I engine. Now this engine was used in the Corvette, Camaro, and Firebird from the mid 80s to the early 90s. Now I'm still currently running the Rochester product style Bosch injectors, and they are about 35 years old, so they're definitely starting to show their wear. Now I will be upgrading those injectors to the newer 4-hole style Bosch injector that I've heard great reviews about. Now I will also be replacing the O-rings in that fuel rail, and I'll be replacing the fuel pressure regulator as well. So let's get started on that now. So first things first, you'll want to disconnect your battery. Now we will need to remove the throttle body, so let's start off by removing the intake boot. Now disconnect all of the throttle linkage. Now you will have to remove the cruise control cable so you can remove this bracket off the plenum. You will also need to remove the throttle cable. And now you can remove the cable bracket. Now on this side, we'll have to unplug all of the sensors and remove all of the hoses. Lastly, we'll remove the two coolant lines so we can remove the throttle body. Make sure to put a drain pan on the bottom, as a little bit of coolant will flow out. And now we can remove the throttle body. Now we can work on removing the plenum, but first let's remove this cap. Remove all vacuum lines connected to the plenum. And don't forget the brake booster line located in the back. To remove the plenum, you'll need a T40 size Torx bit. There are 8 bolts total, 4 on the driver's side and 4 on the passenger side. Once you remove them all, you can remove the plenum. Now carefully lift off your plenum. Make sure to unplug the IAT sensor and set the plenum off to the side. We will have to remove the fuel rail, and in order to do that we have to take off these runners, but first let's remove the PCV hose and disconnect the fuel injector so we can set the wiring off to the side. Be sure to unplug the alternator as well. This model is equipped with a cold start valve, so I'll remove that first. Carefully remove the cold start injector. Each runner will have 6 bolts bolting it down to the lower intake. And make sure to keep the bolt orientation correct, as each one is a different size. Each runner will have 1 bolt threading through from the other side of the intake, and you can access this one right behind the fuel pressure regulator. Next, remove all of the hard plastic lines. The next cross bolt is located in the front by the thermostat housing. Once all the bolts are removed, you can finagle out the runners. Now here is the orientation of the intake runner lower bolts. This is the driver's side, and here is the orientation for the passenger side. Now it's a good idea to stuff your intake ports with a rag or paper towels so no dirt, debris, or bolts fall into them. Remove the front fuel rail mount bolt that's located next to the fuel lines. Disconnect the fuel lines from the rail. Remove the 4 bolts holding down the fuel rail. Now carefully lift up and remove the fuel rail. Make sure to lift up by the injectors. Now with the fuel rail out, I'll take this opportunity to not only change out these injectors, but to disassemble this fuel rail and change out the O-rings as well. And I'll also install a new fuel pressure regulator as it is built into the fuel rail itself. So let's get started on that now. Before we get started onto the fuel rail, we'll have to remove these injectors first, and to do so, you'll have to unlock these clips holding them into place. After all the injectors are removed, remove all of the bolts that hold in the crossover tubes. This bolt can be a little tricky to get to, so remove all of the other bolts and then you can separate the two fuel rails. Once it's separated, you can get to that bolt now easily. Now after the fuel rail has been completely disassembled like this, make sure you fish out all of the old O-rings that might be stuck inside. Now to clean up the fuel rail and components, I will be using a little bit of degreaser and a nylon brush to clean up all the dirt and debris. With the fuel rail and components nice and clean, set them off to the side and let them air dry for a few hours or even overnight. And in the meantime, we can work on the fuel pressure regulator. We're going to change out the internal diaphragm. Now you will need a T10 safety Torx bit to do this job. Now the diaphragm is spring loaded, so make sure to remove the last two screws evenly. Now install the new diaphragm into the cap itself, as the new diaphragm will hold the screws into place, and then reinstall onto the housing. Make sure to set down all the screws evenly. Make sure you remove the old O-rings and match them up with a new set of Viton O-rings. The Viton O-rings are resistant to fuel and they will work really well in this application. Just make sure to coat them lightly with a little bit of oil so they will install nicely into the rail. Once you have all the new O-rings installed and oiled, press the two halves together. And install your clamps. And tighten them down. In order to install the new injectors onto the rail, you will have to remove the clip off of the old injector so you can securely lock these into place. Make sure to put a light coat of oil on these O-rings as well so they slide into the rail nice and easily. The fuel rail is now completed. Now let's go install it. Now I do want to note that I also changed out the O-rings coming out from those fuel lines down there. So make sure you use the Viton O-rings as well. Once you have it all lined up, clamp it down. Install all the bolts and tighten them down. And now you can tighten up your fuel lines. Now carefully reinstall your hard plastic lines. Now uncover your ports and install new runner gaskets. The gaskets will clip into place. Now finagle the runners back into place and install the lower bolts. Be sure to only finger tighten these bolts. Reinstall the cold start valve. After all of the lower runner bolts are installed and your runners are nice and loose like this, go ahead and install your upper gasket. You'll want to keep the runners loose like this so the plenum can fit in here nicely. And be sure to route your throttle valve cable in between the runners. And make sure to plug in the electrical on the intake. Now carefully set down the plenum. And again, give all the upper plenum bolts a nice snug fit. With all the runner bolts now installed, go ahead and torque down the lower ones first. I personally like to torque down the middle one first and follow that up with the outer two. Once the lower bolts are torqued down, go ahead and torque down the upper runner to plenum bolts. Now install the throttle body and new gasket. And tighten it down. Install both coolant bypass hoses. Reconnect all of the vacuum lines. Connect the throttle body electrical. Bolt on your throttle bracket. Now route the cables and connect them to the throttle body. Next, connect all the injectors and be sure to connect the alternator. And now connect your PCV valve. Install the distributor cover. Reconnect your intake boot. And now you can finally reconnect your battery. Well, alright guys, there you have it. We installed those injectors and cleaned up that fuel rail. Now she runs a little bit better and is a bit more responsive. This car does need some work, and I've been working on it ever so often any chance I get to try to get it back to tip-top shape. But if this video helped you guys, give me a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.